YouTube, my name's Rich. Welcome back to the shop. Those of you more astute viewers may have already noticed we're not actually in the shop today. It's kind of hot and humid and nasty outside, so instead we're in my photography studio, or as my wife likes to call it, the dining room. And today we're going to talk about macro photography. I've been a photographer for about 40 years now, and macro photography is still, by and large, my favorite kind of photography. So first off, what is macro photography? Strictly speaking, macro photography is photographing anything and making it such that the image captured on the sensor or on the film is the same size as the actual object that you're photographing itself. So if I photograph something that's, let's see, that's something small here, right? That's 1 inch wide, then that image will actually appear 1 inch on the sensor. So when you print that or look at the monitor, it's greatly enlarged. So why do I like macro photography so much? Well, there's a lot of things to like about it. One great thing is you can shoot macro photography anywhere, anytime. Unlike landscape photography, you don't have to go and drive 2 hours, get someplace, sit around and wait for 2 hours for the light to be perfect. For macro photography, you don't have to leave your house. You can go outside in the backyard, you can stay indoors, and the variety of subjects available for macro photography is literally endless. Once you get really close, the world is a very different place than the world we're used to looking at. Things are full of interesting textures and colors that go unnoticed in daily life. So to do macro photography, you don't need a lot of expensive gear. Really, there's lots of ways to do it depending on what you have and what you're looking to do. Really, to do it really well, I think, a camera that has interchangeable lenses, whether it's a DSLR or a mirrorless, is really going to make your life quite a bit easier. If all you have is a point and shoot, you can get by with these magnifying diopters. They usually come in sets. This is a Vivitar set, and this has a +4, I think a +2 and a +1. And these just screw onto the filter thread of the lens, and they'll magnify things for you so you can get a little closer than you would otherwise. Image quality is going to suffer some, right? You're adding some glass to the setup. If you want to do this, you want to definitely go and buy a fairly decent set from a reputable known manufacturer. I wouldn't recommend just buying the crummy ones off eBay from China. But a decent set will do the job. You could pick up a set of these probably for, I would say, around $10. And the world of macro photography will begin to open up to you. I'm going to kind of divide macro photography into two sort of broad categories. The first being what I'll call sort of walk around macro photography. So go out in the backyard and let's stalk some bugs. So to do that, the best way to do that really is to pick up a macro lens, and that is a lens that will focus down close enough so you can do, again, 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. The other thing you're going to want for doing macro photography is you're going to want a flash, and you're going to want a flash diffuser of some sort. So I've got this super trick set up here on my Nikon D5100. This is a Nikon Speedlight SB800, but just about any flash that has a swiveling head on it will do. And then for a diffuser, what I did was I went and got a Pringles can. I cut a hole in it to fit the flash. I put a little piece of foam in the front to diffuse the light, and I got extra fancy. I painted mine and actually made it so that it extends so you can bring the light right to the subject. Because when you're shooting macro, the depth of field is very, very shallow, so you're going to want to stop down pretty far, typically f8 at the widest, and stop down further is typically better. So the more light you can bring to the situation, the better. And if you just try to use the on-camera flash, which you should really never use, or even just a shoe-mounted flash, what's going to happen a lot of times is the lens is going to create a shadow on your subject. So a flash diffuser of some sort is extremely helpful, and that helps bring the action, the light right into where the action is. Like I said, this is a Nikon SB800. Really, any swivel head flash will do. This will do through the lens metering, but you can pick up a Vivitar 2600 flash for like $5, and it will do a perfectly good job for macro photography. if you're serious about doing macro photography, I would highly recommend picking up a good macro lens. So for the Nikon world, the 105mm f2.8 micro Nikkor is kind of the gold standard. This will focus down to true one-to-one reproduction. It stops down to f32 for good depth of field. It's incredibly sharp, and it's also just a good all-purpose, all-around medium telephoto. It's a pretty nice portrait lens, and you can pick one of these up used for a little under 300 bucks. Nikon actually still makes a version of this lens. They make two, actually. They make a manual focus version, and then they make the AFS-G version, which has the built-in focus motor. But the problem with that lens, in my opinion at least, is it's one of those Nikon G lenses that doesn't have an aperture ring. So we'll talk about this later, but one of the things that's often useful in macro photography is being able to take the lens off the camera and mount it in reverse. There's a number of reasons for doing that. Most lenses are aspherical, and they're designed for bringing light that's far from the front element and focusing it close to the rear element. When you're doing macro photography, you've got your subject typically very close to the lens. So sometimes you can get better results and you'll get better magnification by reversing the lens on the camera, using a reversing ring like this one here, and mounting it that way. The G series lenses, you have no aperture control when you do that. They stop down all the way and they stay stopped down all the way. So I don't particularly care for those. The only reason that I can think of that Nikon went to those G series lenses without an aperture ring is they probably cost $5 less to manufacture. But for macro work in particular, I would steer clear of them. There's also a 200mm version of this lens. It's pretty pricey. You'd be probably hard pressed to find one of those for less than 500 bucks. The advantage of the 200mm is it lets you stay further away from your subject. So if you're out stalking bugs or other living objects, it lets you keep your distance. For one-to-one macro with this lens, you're going to be focused down to just about 1 foot or so. So you got to kind of get up in its face to get really true one-to-one reproduction. But this is a fantastic lens. I use this lens all the time. It's probably my favorite lens that I own for my Nikon system, and it's a great way to go. So here's some shots that I took out in the backyard using the 105mm micro Nikkor and my Super Trick Crinkle Scan flash setup. Now, if you don't want to spend, 300 bucks for a macro lens, there's lots and lots of less expensive ways to do macro photography that you can walk around with. Probably the least expensive way and in the simplest way is to pick up some extension rings, or some extension tubes. So these are just hollow metal tubes with a camera mount on one end and a lens mount on the other. A lot of them come in sets like this, so you can adjust them, so you can put a short stack on or a long stack. Some of them, like this one, have the aperture coupling ring in there. Some of them don't. And you can pick up a decent set. These are genuine Nikon ones. I think I paid about 25 bucks for these. So they're pretty inexpensive. And then you can just use just about any prime lens that fits your camera system for doing macro photography. If you notice when you focus a lens, right, typically as you focus closer, the barrel's going to move further away from the focal plane of the camera. So what an extension tube does is it moves the entire lens further away from the focal plane, letting you focus up close. And for a 50mm lens, about a 25mm extension ring will get you typically pretty close to one-to-one reproduction. And this is a 50mm E-series Nikon, 50mm f1.8. You can pick one of these lenses up for probably about $85 in excellent condition. It's a fantastic all-purpose lens. It's 50mm, so it's just a very, very slight telephoto on a crop frame sensor camera, and kind of the sort of quote standard lens for a full frame or 35mm film camera. I like these E-series lenses quite a bit. One really nice thing about them is they're really squat. So when you mount it on the camera, it's nice and compact. You can stick this under your coat in the wintertime and not have anything really bulky. So that's sort of the walk-around setup. Now, what if you want to get closer? Well, if you want to get really close, there's kind of two ways to do it. One is you can start stacking up extension tubes, but that can get a little bit unwieldy, but it is fairly inexpensive. The other way to do it is with a macro bellows. So I have actually two bellows here right now. This is the Nikon Bellows PB6. This is the latest Nikon Bellows. This thing is, beautifully built. The finish is wonderful. All the controls work nice and smooth on it. But this is going to set you back about $175 before you start looking at lenses. So it's an expensive way to go, but depending on the lens you put on these, you can get about 10-to-1 reproduction ratio when these are fully extended. So, you can start getting really, really, really close to things. Now, you don't need the official, genuine, Nikon Bellows setup. A third-party Bellows does a perfectly fine job. I'd stick away from the $15, made in China ones that you see on eBay all the time. But you can pick up a used, good quality Bellows setup for well under $100. This one happens to be a Vivitar. This one uses T-mount, so you can use Nikon lenses on a Pentax body. You can use Canon body with Nikon lenses. You can mix and match these T-mounts any way you like, which is super convenient, because it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to use lenses. I would recommend picking up a Bellows that has what's called a focus rail. So the Bellows extension, let me unlock this. This basically controls your magnification, right? How far the Bellows is extended away from the camera. When you actually want to focus, you're not going to want to focus with the focus ring on the lens. You're going to want to typically focus by either moving the subject back and forth, or more conveniently, moving the whole camera back and forth. So this Bellows has a focus rail on it. This mounts on a tripod, and then when you turn the dial here, I hope I'm in frame, the entire unit will slide up and back. So you can get very, very precise focusing. It also lets you do what's called focus stacking. Because the depth of field is so shallow, what you can do is take multiple images of the subject, moving the focus just back just a millimeter at a time, sometimes even less, so that you've got multiple images that are exactly the same with a different plane in focus. And then you can use something like Photoshop to stack those together, and Photoshop figures out which parts are in focus, and it creates a mask with those and throws away the fuzzy parts and gloms all the other ones together. So it's a way of getting depth of field that's not really otherwise obtainable. So that's the extension bellows. Now, what lenses work on extension bellows? Well, again, pretty much any lens. Longer lenses will give you more distance, shorter lenses will give you more magnification, typically speaking. You want a lens that you can manually stop down with a bellows. You want to focus at full aperture and then stop down and shoot. A really good option for doing bellows work is using in larger lenses. So, people are dismantling their darkrooms all the time these days, and you can pick up a really good high quality and larger lens. This is an Nikkor 50mm 2.8. This is the later version, and these can be had for about $50. The thing about it in larger lenses, if you think about a typical camera lens, again, it's designed to take a subject far away, catch the light, and focus it close down to the film plane. And a larger lens is designed to take a subject, a negative, project the light through towards the front of the lens and focus it relatively far away onto the photographic paper, right? So larger lenses work really good for macro work. They're designed to have a very flat field. They're designed for minimal distortion, and like I said, they're very inexpensive. Most of the time with a larger lens like this, you want to actually mount this backward so that it's capturing the light from the end. There's a couple ways of doing that. The easiest way is to buy some step up, step down rings. So this is a 40.5mm to 52, and then you can just screw the lens on that. And then on that, I've actually got a 52mm Nikon BR2A, which has a Nikon bayonet mount, which will then mount directly onto the bellows. So you can do that, and now you're ready to shoot. If you want to do this on a budget, like I said, these are probably $50, $60, $70 depending on the condition. You don't need a Nikon enlarging lens. These are pretty good quality, and they're very well regarded in the macro world. But you can pick up a Vivitar like this, a 50 millimeter, what is this, an f5.6, for about 15 bucks. And this will do a pretty good job. I'm sorry, this is actually an 80 millimeter. So what else might be handy for macro photography work? Well, again, like I said, getting lots of light on the subject is critically important. You're going to be shooting at dark apertures. You lose light as you extend the bellows because the image circle becomes greatly enlarged at the back here. You're only looking at a small portion of it. So a flash is really going to be critical. When I'm shooting macro photography in my little portable studio here, I'll usually just use my speed light, and I have this is a Nikon XC17 extension cable that mounts on the shoe of the camera. I put the flash on it, and a lot of times I'll just hold this by hand and sort of focus it right in on the subject. Depending on what aperture I'm shooting and what the subject is, this may be as close as a couple inches away, and I'll usually put this on manual and shoot at about 50% power. Auto exposure, auto focus with macro work, generally not particularly useful. The autofocus systems don't focus very effectively or very quickly at those kinds of ranges. The auto exposure systems can be fooled. As you move the lens further away, the effective aperture can change. As far as I know, all the Nikons compensate for that. I believe the Canons don't. But with digital, your best bet really is to just shoot a bunch of test frames, check the exposure, either by popping a card into your PC and looking at it, or just looking at it on the screen in the back of the camera, and adjust from there. Bracket your shots, and you'll get some great results. What else do I have that's very useful? This is a right angle adapter. So when I've got the bellows set up, usually I'm shooting something low. I'll set a little white box down here. This lets you, pardon my reach here. So this attaches to the viewfinder of the camera and lets you look straight down into the camera to be able to frame your shot and focus it up. If you have the flippy screen on the camera, that's also a nice way to do it. Just turn on live view and you can do it that way as well. I'm kind of old school. I prefer looking through the viewfinder. Another kind of trick rig. This is a tilt. What do you call it? This is a tilt adapter. So as you turn this ring here, this actually tilts the front and the back of this unit, and it's got a female bayonet and a male bayonet. So this mounts between the camera and the lens, or between the bellow and the lens. And as you tilt this, it actually takes these out of parallel, so that the lens, just to sort of do it, show you kind of a drastic effect, it'll actually take the lens and turn it to the side. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, like I said, depth of field is very, very shallow. So if I've got a subject here, I'm only going to get a very, very narrow slice that's in focus. By shifting the lens, or by tilting the lens rather, you can move the plane of focus so that it's not perpendicular to the film plane anymore. You can get a little bit more of the subject in focus, and you can also get some interesting effects by having the focus sort of not be perpendicular to the viewer. Some of the older Nikon bellows, I believe is the PB4, have tilt shift built into them. One of these days I'll find one of those, and for a reasonable price. They tend to be about $250, $300, so I haven't picked one of those up yet. But this was about $45 on eBay. Came from China. It's actually pretty well made. The fit and finish on it is really better than I was expecting. This tilts up to, I think, 8 degrees. So not really drastic, but enough to get some pretty good effects. And it's a handy thing to have in your kit. So that's the gear for macro photography. What else? This is a handy thing to have. This is a Nikon accessory called the BR3. So when you reverse mount the lens, there's a couple problems with that. Really the biggest one being that you've got the rear element of the lens kind of hanging out in space here. It's subject to damage. So the BR3 mounts on here, and it's got a 52mm filter thread, so you can screw a protective filter on there. Even without a filter, it just kind of gives you a little bit little bit of buffer space to protect the back of the lens on there. So that's a handy thing to have. I don't know if there's a Canon equivalent to this. Like I said, this is a Nikon unit, and most of these accessories you can pick up, you know, secondhand for really. I think these are probably $25. So you don't have to invest a ton of money to do macro photography. At the end of the video, I'll put some shots I've captured lately in here. You know, I like doing bugs. Flowers are interesting, but if you get some close-up gear, walk around and point it at stuff, and you will be amazed at the amount of color and texture that is in everyday objects, like I said, that just goes completely unnoticed. And macro photography, it's a great thing you can do on a rainy day. And like I said, the list of subjects available is essentially limited only by your imagination. So here's a few shots I took of my pet using my tabletop macro setup. These were taken with the 50mm L-Nikkor larger lens and the Bellows. And like I said, when you get really close, the world is a very different place. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope it was educational a little bit. And look forward to seeing you guys back soon. Thanks a lot.